Welcome, everyone. You are all now muted, and you will be unmuted as soon as I finish this introduction. Welcome to our Gramercy Book Club discussion featuring Vladimir, tonight's book selection by author Julia May Jonas. I'm Linda Cass, owner of Gramercy Books and author event curator. Thanks for joining us. And I want to thank the Women's Fund of Central Ohio for being Gramercy's community partner for this book club program. We are live streaming through Zoom meeting, and this program will be recorded. So I want to preview the next hour for you. After introductions, our moderator, Sandra Macpherson, will lead you in a discussion about Vladimir for about 30 minutes. We'll be joined by Julia May Jonas for the following half hour. Sandra will ask Julia your questions as well as several of her own during that latter time. Let me review. Most of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with Zoom meeting platform. On the upper right corner of your screen, you have those two viewing options. If you want to see everyone, put it in gallery view. If you want to see the speaker as she or he is talking, put it in speaker view. Next, just to remind you, the mute, unmute icon, very important. It appears as a microphone on your screen. Right now, while you're all muted, once I introduce our facilitators and discussion begins, you will be able to unmute yourself when you have a comment. Then we just ask that you mute yourself when you're finished speaking. You will all be muted again during the Q&A portion of the program. The chat box is another handy tool, and the icon typically sits on the bottom of your screen. When you click on that box, it opens a window on the right side and allows you to write comments. Some of you have already opened that up. If you have a question you'd like Sandra to ask Julia during the second half of the program, we ask if you could insert that question in all capital letters so that Sandra can see it clearly and separate that from any kind of chatting that's going on. You can also, if you'd like, comment in a chat box if you don't want to speak on camera during the book discussion. The chat box text will also be recorded. So if you haven't done so yet, click on chat right now. We're just going to provide links to our March author programs just to kind of let you know what's coming up. Some are virtual, some are in the bookstore. Please know that for in-person programs, we require proof of vaccination and encourage attendees to wear masks to ensure everyone's safety. On Thursday, March 3rd, that's next Thursday at 7, we're going to host a virtual evening of inspired poetry featuring Todd Boss, who's going to discuss his new poetry collection, Someday the Plan of a Town, with our own poet, Maggie Smith. A one-night-only evening with music icon Dolly Parton and #1 best-selling author James Patterson will be held on Sunday, March 6th at 7:30 p.m. Dolly and James will be talking about their collaboration of the novel Run, Rose, Run, coming out the next day. We will return to our in-person moderated Gramercy Book Club on March 23rd at 7 o'clock when we feature Violetta, a book by Isabel Allende, whose main character is 100 years old and whose life spans the 20th century. So we thought we'd have it moderated by a historian, Ohio State historian, David Steigerwald. And finally, on Wednesday, March 30th at 7, we're going to host a free in-person poetry night with two masters, Linda Gregerson, who's launching her poetry collection Canopy, and David Baker. So you can click on the link for any of these programs to learn more about them or to register. And we have a whole lot of additional Gramercy book author programs on our website. And you can also find them in our e-newsletter if you sign up for that. And you can do so at our website, gramercybooksbexley.com. We even now have a Facebook group for Gramercy Book Club, and we'll be using it to announce upcoming book club programming. So stay tuned. And now on to tonight's program. In our book club selection, Vladimir, author Julia May Jonas explores charged territory, where the boundaries of morality bump up against the impulses of the human heart. Propulsive, darkly funny, and wildly entertaining, Vladimir perfectly captures the personal and political minefield of our current moment, exposing the nuances and the gray area between power and desire. Julie Mae Jonas is a playwright, and she teaches theater at Skidmore College. She holds an MFA in playwriting from Columbia University, and she lives in Brooklyn with her family. Vladimir is her debut novel. Moderating tonight's discussion is Sandra Macpherson. Sandra is an associate professor of English at The Ohio State University. She's an expert in the history of the novel and in feminist theory. How perfect a person to moderate today's discussion. Sandra's the author of essays that appear in English literary history and also in Representations. And she's the author of the book Harm's Way, Tragic Responsibility and the Novel Form. Welcome and thank you so much for being with us tonight, Sandra.
Thank you so much for having me, Linda. I'm very, very excited about this book and about this event. And I'm so grateful for all that Gramercy does to keep literature alive in Columbus. So I'm honored to be here. So I can't wait to hear from all of you. I can only see one page of you at a time. And I would love it if you felt comfortable speaking rather than writing in the chat, but I totally understand if you don't want to turn on your camera and would rather, leave it off and speak in the chat. So I'll try to keep my eye both on your boxes and on what's happening in the chat. As Linda says, I'm a historian of the novel. I am an expert in 18th century British literature, which is when the Anglophone novel originates. And this is just this book is so perfect for me because my book is about accidental harm and liability in the early novel. And of course, here we have a novel and it's about sort of sexual harm as well. And so here we have a novel that's about sexual harm that ends with an accident and a payout, through liability law, right? Or an insurance payout. I'm just sort of fascinated by that. I think that the fact that the Women's Fund has funded this is really interesting because to me, this book is very much about the second wave feminism coming up against whatever wave we're in at the present, fourth wave, fifth wave feminism, and a kind of confusion that people my age have, feminists of that wave, have about some of the commitments of the present moment in feminist activism and feminist thought. And I think that the novel is very much about that. So I'm curious what your response is to the sexual harassment case against John, and whether you think what our unnamed narrator is doing in pursuing Vladimir is itself sexual harassment. So what do y'all think of John? Let's start there. Oh, and if you want to speak, I don't know if along the bottom, you can put up, if you click reactions, you can put up your hand. But you also should just feel free to speak out and your little square will light up and I will know that you want to speak.
I'll speak up. John is familiar. Having spent my entire adult career in academia and fortunately a better part of it in the medical center, he is a very familiar character, someone I have encountered many times in my life, but so is the unnamed narrator, whom I have to admit I really loathed for bits and pieces of the book, but also found totally captivating as she wandered through her very bumpy life journey. So that's all I'll say.
No, I love, that's fantastic. You've said a lot. And especially, I'm especially interested in the fact that your loathing encompasses both the wronged wife and the, you know, and the serial adulterer slash harasser. Because I think that's super interesting, the way that Jonas demands that we identify to a certain extent with this woman, because she's a first person narrator telling us her story. We identify with her even though we don't like her. Did others feel a similar way, both about John's familiarity and a kind of loathsomeness of our narrator?
Yeah, I'll speak. Yeah, I mean, John's a cad, as she says many times, as if that's a minor put down. He's a cad. He's so much more than a cad. And, you know, I think she made her purposefully unlikable at certain passages to create the tension, part of the tension that's there you want to root for, but her behavior is a little bit beyond the pale at times, and her, you know, self-aggrandizement mixed in with her self-loathing is also troubling. I just thought it was interesting how she was so interested in this young man sexually, but so concerned about her appearance, which I thought was an interesting twist, because I don't think most sexual harassers, I don't think Harvey Weinstein cared if anybody thought he was unattractive, for instance. So I thought that was an interesting twist. But I liked her in spite of herself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the narcissism or the preoccupation with her appearance and her aging body, right? And I mean, that's what happens when you flip this script, you know, because it's Vladimir, as many of the reviews point out, is an allusion to Vladimir Nabokov and to Lolita. And this is a kind of flipped Lolita, right? Where we have, instead of an older man chasing a young woman, a nymphette, we have an older woman chasing a male nymphette. I mean, he's 40, so he's not, you know, he's not that nymphette-y. But, you know, the way that her anxiety about her own desirability gets in the way of her capacity to express that desire and take what she wants, which is what she's trying to do, right? She's trying to be John in a way, and yet she, you know, she finds it difficult because, as you say, unlike John, who apparently is not self-conscious at all about what he's doing or about his desirability, she, as a 56-year-old woman, is highly self-conscious about that. And I was just stunned at how well Jonas can inhabit the mind of I'm 57. I was like, oh, wow. Have you been living in there? You know, how old are you even? Are you even 40? And how do you know this? So the question of this flipping of the script, right? You know, the version of feminism that she keeps espousing, this second wave version that associates sexual autonomy with agency, right, for women. And, you know, where she sort of says, I don't understand these students who experience desire and being desired as de facto a form of harm or oppression, right? In my day, you know, the idea that someone powerful would desire me was a source of power for me, right? And, you know, but obviously the novel is quite self-conscious about and undercuts that idea, right? That desire is, or being desired or being desirable is a source of power for women, because, you know, she can't, or she isn't in the end, pleased with her encounter with Vladimir, right? And can't get rid of the sense that you know, his willingness to capitulate to her being dominant and her being the sadist and him being the supplicant, right? She can't in the end take pleasure in that. do you, many of the reviews that I read they say this about the novel. They say, when they summarize it, they say, a man, this professor has been charged with sexual harassment for having consensual relations with her, having had over the years a number of consensual relations with students while they were students. His wife was, herself consented to this arrangement, was was encouraged this arrangement, right? They all say that. Did you guys think that she was fully on board with this arrangement that they have? Just looking around.
I'll say something about that, Sandra. There was a point at which she wanted to have a big family. Remember, they only had the one child, and he had a vasectomy apparently. And even when she was having her affair with David, she kind of, I don't know, fantasized how there'd be this big family. So that kind of made me feel that as much as she said she wanted, it was fine with her, and she was also engaging, that I think she wanted, in a way, a traditional arrangement, it seemed to me, because of that.
The baby she wants it's with David that she imagines having another child, right?
Yes, yes. But she also, in that reference, mentions that John had a vasectomy soon after they had Sydney.
Which helps with the affairs being, having limited consequences. Yes.
It's him making the decisions all the time. I mean, obviously he went and had the vasectomy, and she doesn't say that she approved of it. And I think that her idea for him to have these relationships might have seemed kind of cool to her when she came up with it, but it all got away from her. I mean, that's what I think is the answer to your last question.
Right. I mean, I was struck by how these reviews take that arrangement also as a sign of her autonomy, whereas in the novel, she describes it as getting out ahead of what she imagines will be his eventual loss of interest in her, right? So
Right.
It doesn't come from a place of power. It comes from a place of, a sort of presumption that she doesn't have what it takes to hold his attention. And so she comes up with, or she, consents to this arrangement as a way of preventing or making future betrayal or future future betrayal feel like something that she wanted, right? And that therefore doesn't count as betrayal or doesn't count as subversion of her autonomy, right?
Well, I thought there was also an interesting point that she made, though, at one point where she was like, he was kind of an exhausting person with his need for constant attention. And so she makes this point about, it actually gave me a break, So I thought that was a complicated way to say that, like, you give up your relationship in a way because the person's just exhausting with his narcissism about needing attention. It was easier for her at certain points.
Yes, a girlfriend I immediately told to read this when I finished it. That was the first sentence she sent to me in a text, was the one about how it gave her a chance to be left alone. And I think that we're all feeling, after 2 years of being stuck in a kind of enforced intimacy with our domestic partners, just that, she felt that, and I knew what she meant. But it's the novel is so smart about the complexities of consent, and the complexities of what feels like agency, and is it agency? And anyway, what is agency or power or autonomy or sovereignty in the realm of desire? Because desire is this thing that, takes you over, or, isn't controllable in the way that she her whole plan for how the abduction is going to go is just this bid for, a bid for control that, again, like, reviewers don't seem to think that her pursuit of Vladimir is retaliatory, that it's a retaliation against John, right? And she herself insists that it's not, that it's just something she wants for herself. But it does seem interesting that she abducts this young man or younger man, right, and takes him to the woods and straps him down right when her husband is, going in front of the not firing squad, but jury.
At that particular point, Sandra, I thought it was like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf meets Sleuth. And I don't know if people are familiar with, the play and the two books that are associated. And there's also something about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and these iconic, feminine archetypes that appear in, literature. And and the other thing, and you mentioned this too, Sandra, and I'd be very interested to hear what the author has to say, the way that she was able to inhabit with specific details the life of a woman in her 50s, even to the detail of being in the bathtub and being reminiscent of a scene of Julie Christie in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I mean, that's from my generation, and that's so specific. And I thought, where is the author sort of grasping, that to place that? And I mean, those were some of the really captivating things about the novel. I mean, just the placement of scene was kind of extraordinary. But
yeah, that's a great question, and I've written it down. Yes, I was stunned by that because I just finished teaching a class last semester where we watched Don't Look Now, and I was trying to explain to my students just how Julie Christie was everything, to a young woman in the 70s, and they're, first of all, they're horrified that Donald Sutherland was a sex symbol. Like, they just don't get that at all, which fair enough. But Julie Christie, come on. So yeah, I don't know, like, did someone sit her down and have her watch McCabe and Mrs. Miller? Were her parents into that? How does she know? And how does she know the peculiar feeling of being an academic? I mean, perhaps this is just the way being a teacher and being a gendered body works, no matter how old you are. But she's also really captures the way that the classroom dynamic and the eros of teaching and the question of power in the classroom, it's just different when you're a woman, which is why you hardly ever find cases in which women have, sexually harassed their male students, because the gender hierarchy undercuts the power that the woman, perhaps feels she, that structurally she has that power, but as a woman in relation to a man, even a man much younger than she is, that it doesn't feel safe in the way that it apparently feels safe to Pat, to the men like John, that we've all perhaps been familiar with.
I thought that one of the interesting parts of the book, and kept me interested especially, was how the author took the issues we've been talking about and then placed them on a campus, and the narrator is essentially, in some respects, a victim of wokeness, in the sense that the women on campus are expecting her to take actions in response to her husband's activities when she shouldn't have been caught up in the fray. But I like the way she wove in the campus dynamics and the expectations of especially the women students of her.
Mm-hmm. I found it so much smarter than The Chair. Did you guys watch The Chair on HBO? It was a very, very popular limited series on HBO starring Sandra Oh, and it was set in a liberal arts campus, and it was about wokeness, and a male professor is accused not of sexual harassment but of hate speech, and I just thought this was so much more complicated and less caricature. It didn't caricature the positions, because as you say, and as the narrator says, to be a victim of wokeness, right? I mean, what she says to the young women is, why are you assimilating me to my husband? Yeah. As though it were some kind of coverture law, like in the 18th century, where women have no legal existence, right, outside that of their husband. And she's sort of right about that. On the other hand, and I really wanted to ask you this before Ms. Jonas comes on. On the other hand, the last sentence of the novel is, "Oh, shame." Mm-hmm. And I'm, as though what happens at the end is she recognizes that she is responsible, or ought to have been thinking of these young women all along, because when she, in the italics, right, she imagines what the now middle-aged 30-year-old woman is thinking, right? And she says, the woman says something like, I was an adult, but I was still a child, or something, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I found that made her so unlikable, is her constant reference to consensual. This is consensual. And it really wasn't until the very end she gets that it was not really consensual. I mean, the power dynamic, until she puts her narrative in the place of the young woman, that she finally figures it out. But it didn't make her very likable.
I mean, consent is the problem for feminist thought and feminist jurisprudence, and right, the fact that you cannot, with any clarity, with any sort of epistemological certainty, you can't say where consent lies, you know, because these women are saying retroactively and retrospectively, what felt consensual to me at the time, I now recognize as having been harmful to me, whether I consented or not. And yet, rape, for example, is a harm of non-consent. Whereas sexual harassment is interesting because it gets rid of the question of consent and just looks at the structural, you know, the structural inequality, right? So yeah, so she has, throughout the novel, as you say, Kathy, I think it is, a sort of flat notion of consent, or a very, I don't know, sentimental notion of consent that is constantly being put under pressure by the young women in, you know, within the world of the novel, and that she eventually allows herself to feel that pressure as a shame and as responsibility, perhaps. There was one more question up in the right-hand corner there. Robert Rothman.
Oh, it was me. Sitting here, I'm thinking about the Clintons, and I'm wondering if I mean, it's very applicable to this book, and I'm wondering if that had any influence on her. I'm thinking about how people are now saying, well, Monica was being used. It's just all amazing to me. I mean, to me, Monica was a girl who went off to Washington to accomplish what she accomplished. And yet now we're supposed to feel sorry for her. So, and he's the big bad wolf, of course. And he is the big bad wolf, but, and Hillary gets
Even at the time,
throwing him out, you know?
right. Well, it's true. We can ask her about that because structurally, John and our narrator are a sort of Clinton, Bill, Hillary sort of situation. This, you know, what it looks like for a feminist to stand by her man, right, is part of what's going on here. But I was going to say that actually there was one person who called the Lewinsky scandal sexual harassment at the time, and that was Joe Lieberman, weirdly, or interestingly. But anyway, I think we need to get Julie on here. We need like 4 hours for this conversation, I think.
I see Julia. She's
There
just
she is.
connecting. Hi, Julia.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Linda, and there's Sandra. I wanted to welcome you to Gramercy Book Club. Your novel is so provocative and bold, and we had just the beginnings of a conversation. Sandra Macpherson, our moderator, expertly led our discussion. As you know, she's a university English professor herself. Also a scholar of feminist theory and history of the novel. So we were able to converse on so many of the intriguing elements of your story. So welcome. I'm going to just let you and Sandra have a conversation. Everyone else is going to be muted and their questions are going to come to you through Sandra, but through our chat box.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you that I adore this novel. And I have so many questions for you, but we also already have some really interesting questions. So I just want to take a couple of minutes at the beginning here to squeeze in my questions, as you know. I'm an historian of the novel. I specialize in 18th century British literature, and I actually wrote a book about accidental harm and liability in the early novel. And so the fact that this novel, and about sexual harm and rape, and so the fact that this novel has all of those things is just, I mean, I'm in love with you and it. But I wanted to begin with the title. So Vladimir, as many of the reviews point out, immediately conjures Vladimir Nabokov and this sort of flipped Lolita that you have going on. But you know, for me, like the cover also, at first I thought Putin, right? Like, okay, so what's Putin doing here? And then I read it and realized, no, it was Nabokov. But Vladimir Vladinsky, it also suggests to me it's very Chekhovian as a name, right? And then you're a playwright, and so and what I love about this novel, what's so smart about it, is what's smart about Lolita, which is that Lolita is about the history of the novel. Lolita understands that the Anglophone novel begins with Samuel Richardson's Pamela in 1739, which Nabokov quotes at the beginning of Lolita, and therefore begins with a narrative that's about the seduction of a 15-year-old girl. The attempted rape of a 15-year-old girl that then gets converted into consent retroactively through marriage and all of that, right? So, you know, and your template isn't the, you know, your allusions aren't to the 18th century, but, you know, but they are to some of my favorite macho novelists, James Salter, Norman Rush, Roth, obviously Updike. But I wanted to actually ask you about Norman Rush's Mating, which you mentioned at one point. And that is one of my favorite novels. And the unnamed woman narrator who has a very complicated relation to desire and gender and feminism, the two novels really seemed in dialogue with one another. And I was wondering if that is true, and what you were thinking, or were you thinking about Rush or these sort of mid-century, you these mid-century American novelists.
I mean, I also love that novel. That I felt like that was a very shifting experience for me when I read Mating. And I was just thinking about that opening and how the opening is really all about desire and about how they travel. She's in Africa, and Africa brings out this desire. I think she talks about a desire for heavy cream and things like that. All of these kind of really sensual things. And so I think in many ways, I don't know that I was necessarily, other than just being a fan, making a direct parallel between the book and Mating, but I think I was emboldened by, first of all, her voice and how incredibly seductive her voice is inside of that book. And I think how she is comparing herself to the other women inside of that book was something I also thought about. And then I think I did think a bit about an interview with Norman Rush where he talked about his process with his wife, and she would kind of write along the sides of his manuscripts like, what an asshole. And, no, she would never say that. What are you talking about? And there was something about that collaboration that also, I think, spurred this kind of idea about this character. And then also, Mating is very hermetic. And I thought about making a hermetic novel purposefully, something that felt very enclosed. You don't see, it's not a sweeping novel about the society of the college. It really is very tight and in on her and her perspective. And so I think that was also a way that it dialogued, I think, with that novel.
Right, and some of our participants here, they may not know the novel, but it has also this very charming and powerful female voice, but where she also is sort of unlikable in ways that your narrator is. And the virtuosity of that, of being able to sustain a voice that is that you repudiate at moments, right? But that you still want to keep hearing from. So one more thing that I wanted to mention. So the prologue to the novel is later in the novel revealed to be the narrator's aborted attempt at autofiction. And I was really thinking a lot about how at the present moment, autofiction is the mode of feminist writing, or there's a really close connection between autofiction and the feminism and the feminist novel. But you repudiate autofiction, I think, in a way similar to the narrator, by giving us a first-person narration that is not autofiction.
Right.
So, you've got some similar qualities to Sally Rooney. You've got obviously your professional ear for dialogue, but I just found this novel so intellectually and conceptually rich. And it made me so happy because I'm 57. And so your narrator, I'm like, how many of us were like, how did you get in the head of a 58-year-old? And so we do want to ask you that. But in my head, I was thinking, oh, thank God, like I can love this millennial author and I can remain ambivalent about Sally Rooney. So autofiction, were you thinking about that and what,
I mean, I think that I was thinking about a translucency of voice, that you kind of mentioned when you talk about how we're able to see through her voice in certain places and make some judgments about her, even as she's, ostensibly on her own side. And I think that, and I think autofiction voices are also very translucent, but there is a form to it, and I think there's an inquiry in the book, I think, about form and how we present story. And so, I felt like the autofiction in a moment is one side of truth, but it's a formed sense of truth. And then we have this other almost fairy tale delivered in her voice, that is this other kind of sense of truth. And I'm always interested in layers of translucency in narrative, I think. And so wanted to play with that. That's always something I find very exciting and activating, I think, as a reader, particularly, is when I feel like I'm interacting with the voice in a way that makes me very active about what my relationship to it is, and what is, not necessarily truth, because she's not an unreliable narrator in that she lies, but when there is a filter on her perspective, potentially, and how we can see through that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat that I want to bring in here. And before you entered, we were talking about, the fact that this woman is 58 is really important. She's a boomer, right? So, and her feminism is second wave feminism, and it's coming up against this new kind of feminism. And someone was wondering if you had the Clinton-Lewinsky affair, in mind. Whether that 90s scandal was, and also especially perhaps as an example of a feminist wife who stood by her man, right?
Yeah, I think I thought about that. I think I thought about a number of patterns of women who had made choices about their relationship for whatever reasons that we would in some way find able to condemn. So I certainly thought about that. And I was recently talking with someone about the novel as also kind of lifting from the Gothic novel, and the idea of the Gothic novel being what happens after the marriage. And I said, potentially the marriage is second wave feminism, that we're asking what happens after that.
Yes, I love that. And that also explains the allusion to Jane Eyre with the fire at the end. And, it's like, I can live with you, but only if you're hobbled by a fire, right? Just like Mr. Rochester. Here's another great question. James Hayes is interested in your development of the character Edwina, the narrator's student, and the scene where she introduces the element of race into the drama of the campus reaction to, sexual harassment charges. And more broadly, the concept of who's included and excluded in the inner circle of these lives and intimate associations. So could you tell us more about, what's going on with Edwina and race in relation to the question of gender and consent and harassment?
Yes, I always wanted to have race present inside of the discussion of the campus, because it is very present inside of all campuses at this moment, and present inside of our collective conversations. And I think, in a way, the narrator will not, it is a moment, I think, when she potentially falls short, because she is unable to acknowledge that there is that there are inequities in choices that professors make in terms of who they let in and who they exclude, and that is something that Edwina is both conscious of, and also that, I think for her, when there is this moment where I think the narrator says, well, everyone should get a chance to be forgiven. And Edwina says, well, they absolutely don't. In my world, they, when you're talking about, Black men in America, they absolutely don't get a chance to be forgiven. And the narrators, and there is an acknowledgement that she lives in this rarefied world, and she's been able to make this her issue and her passion, while there is a greater conversation going on around her.
Right, and we talked about how the final word is shame in the novel, and that that seems to be this moment of, so, I mean, I'm really fascinated by the court case and the payout and the, you know, the accident, and because the whole novel, of course, is about blame and responsibility, and that shame is a kind of recognition of responsibility for what she has previously refused to be responsible for. We were talking about how that refusal rings true in a way. It's like, I am not my husband. I'm not responsible for my husband. Why are you linking his acts to me, right? And yet that final recognition that, oh, shame is, I mean, it's just so rich. And I think it's tied to this last question we had here about Sabrina saying she finds it always so interesting when she roots for a central character who's unlikable, and that's what happened, right, while reading this novel. And she's asking, well, you know, how or why did you do that? And I think the question of shame and that final moment of recognition, it's like the end of Bartleby, humanity, right? It's like, oh, shame.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, a lot of her unlikability to me when I was writing, and I think you have to kind of take yourself out of whether you have, you know, a judgment about your character or not when you're writing it, it comes from an extreme vulnerability, which is the same as shame. I think for her, there's a shame about her simply her age. You know, there's a shame about her body that's put on her that she can't shake as much as she would like to. There's a shame about you know, the fact that she stays with her husband. There's shame about the acts that she takes towards Vladimir. And then I think if you look at all the characters, all of them in some way are kind of interacting with shame in some way. And it's both the, I was going to say it's the perpetrator and it's the realization at the same time, or it's the catalyst. That's what I mean. It's the catalyst and it's also the reckoning, I think, at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking about how, you know, this attempt to flip the narrative and become herself the sexual harasser in a way, since Vladimir is younger, he's untenured, right? He's her junior colleague. You know, the reviews seem to, I don't know, seem not to think that it's retaliatory with respect to John, but to me, it feels very much like a sort of, you know, let's see what happens if I do a version of this, right? But in this Gothic mode. And the fact that she cannot actually inhabit her desire to be the sadist, to be the possessor, to be the powerful, the one on top, right? Is part of that.
I think in a way it's why she doesn't get away with it potentially. I think because she lacks, and not to say that if she got away with it, it would be less redeemable if she got away with it. It would be less redeemable if she didn't have a moment of catching herself inside of it. But yeah, I absolutely think that there's, she wants to find a kind of permission, and that, you know, a permission that she feels like her husband had, and a permission that she potentially sees in Vladimir, you know, and I think she wants to, in some way, take that permission from him. She wants to take something from him. I don't think she's taken something from someone, and that idea, I think, becomes intoxicating in and of itself, you know, and it's very much about that idea.
I mean, the mad woman in the attic, it's like, you know, in Gilbert and Gubar's famous reading of the end of Jane Eyre, they argue that, you know, that fire is necessary, and Rochester's blindness, right? It's necessary for his emasculation or castration, or, right, his being deprived of that power. is what, you know, makes possible the marriage plot at the end of the novel.
Right.
And you know, our narrator is sort of, or you're doing that, except that, you know, we see, oh, I don't know, I'm just so fascinated. I mean, so your tolerance for your character, when you said, I don't want to judge my character in answer to the question, why do you or how do you make someone unlikable, right? That's what rings as so Chekhovian to me, this kind of benevolence toward shame and failure and loathsomeness and right.
Yes, I don't want to, my job is not to tell you whether the horse thief is a good person. My job is to tell you what a horse thief is like.
Yes, exactly. And then also if there's a radiator in Act 3, it's going to blow up in Act 4 or whatever. But so this brings me to the last question we have in the chat is that, you know, did you think of writing this as a play? And what was at stake for you in your feeling that, no, this had to be a novel?
I did start it out as a play actually in 2018, but it was a much different play. And interestingly, I don't think I've shared this before, but the play was titled Autofiction. And
oh my God.
And it was, yeah, and it was about, you know, different ways that we talked about our desire and owned our desire. And there were many different characters who were attempting to translate their desire into words. And then there was a central question about how, you know, how we turn our obsessions into stories, and then how we perpetuate those stories and how we give them form. And the play, I ended up kind of shelving it, and then this one character stayed with me, and then I started writing her out in prose, and it became very clear that her interiority, you know, it was very intoxicating to write in. I felt the voice. I felt like I could work with it. It was material I could go with just from a craft perspective. But also that the discussion itself needed interiority, because we needed to feel like we were inside of her. We needed all of her justifications and her histories, her little asides, her moments of trying, the kind of moments that sneak in where, you know, you realize that she's had some sexual encounters that haven't been okay with her, but they're there, but she's pushing them to the edges. So all of that needed to exist, and you don't have room to do that in a play. Plays are much more about subjects than they are about characters. And I think this particular exploration needed to be about the character.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, and to me as a, you know, historian of the novel, it seems necessary that this particular story be in the novel form, because the problem of young women's consent, of, you know, of desire, the temporality of desire, the ubiquity of shame in the realm of desire. And then of course the question of justice and justification, and the way that that a voice, as you say, I mean, you could have done it, I suppose, in free and direct discourse, but I like that it's in first person, and then with that moment, but it's not autofiction, and it's not autofiction because I want to think about the novel form and narrative form, in a way that interrupts the transparency, you called it, or translucency of like the first person voice. Yeah, it absolutely had to be a novel, and I'm just stunned that it's your first novel. And you know, like,
I've been writing for plays for a long time. So it wasn't you know, it wasn't without precedent of thinking about things.
Yes, well, our group might be interested to hear. I listened to another interview at which you said that, you know, when the theater shut down in spring of 2020, that sort of helped you or prompted you to move to this different form.
Yeah.
So it's one good thing to come out of the pandemic.
Yes, yes. I had a very nice, I had a good pandemic despite the pandemic being hard. But it clarified, things, I think. And it was, I feel so fortunate to have been able to write the novel, to find the form, to find, you know, my what I feel like is a way to work with it. You know, so you encounter something and you realize that you can really work with this form. So that was extremely exciting.
Well, I can't wait to read your next one. I think I also heard you say you were working on another one.
I am, yes.
Does it have a title?
It does. It has a title that's not the title yet.
Right, a placeholder title.
Yes,
right.
yes.
Don't tell us, because then we'll be surprised.
Okay. I'll keep it.
Well, actually, or tell us. You guys want to know? Yeah, you probably want to know. What is the placeholder title?
The placeholder title is "Are You Enjoying Your Forgiveness?" And so we'll see. We'll see.
That reminds me of another novel this reminded me of, which is Disgrace, obviously Coetzee's Disgrace. And that title also makes me think about, you know, that great novel about shame and transgression and sexual harassment and confession and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and forgiveness.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And a real reckoning with real darkness. I think that's always what I think of when I think of that book.
Yeah. So any other last burning questions you want to get in here before we thank Julia May Jonas for spending time with us? Is this about the time we wrap up, Linda?
Yes, actually, Sandra, thank you so much. And Julia, what an illuminating conversation to complement a very interesting conversation we had earlier that, as Sandra said, we could talk for 4 hours. So in the chat, everyone, if you have not purchased a copy of Vladimir, there's a link to do so in the chat. Thank you so very much, Julia, for writing this book. It is extraordinary. I was honored that my quote was in the Indie Next for your book, because I loved it so much. And I was so thrilled to have Sandra Macpherson agree to moderate this discussion. So Sandra, thank you so much. And Nikki Snyder, our digital media manager, who always makes everything move so smoothly. And thank you all for conversation and for participating in this book club tonight. So just wanted to be very grateful. We're at Gramercy Books. We're open 7 days a week, 10 to 6. And, you know, curbside pickup, we have it all. So continue to join us for events and join us to browse and to buy Julia's wonderful, wonderful book. We do look forward to your next one, Julia.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Sandra. Bye.